Thanks. First of all, everyone can hear me? As Mark said, I'm Nancy Trott. I'm the Northwest Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. I've been in journalism for about 2 decades, mostly at the AP, but I've also worked at newspapers and had a stint at abcnews.com back when they launched bi-coastally. I was in the Seattle office. And what I'd like to do is just have the panelists introduce themselves. David?
Hello, I'm David Bunnell. I've been in media for a long time and have witnessed the entire, pretty much, computer revolution from the very beginning. So I'm glad to be here.
I'm Todd Bishop. I'm one of the co-founders of GeekWire.com here in Seattle, and a longtime journalist. Shout out to you guys. A longtime journalist here in Seattle. Got my start in newspapers and have made the transition to digital and a little bit of radio too.
I'm Devin Coldewey. I wrote for TechCrunch for 4 or 5 years, and I still do as a columnist. And now I'm a reporter for NBCnews.com, and that's it.
I'm Brier Dudley. I'm a technology columnist at Seattle Times, also a blogger, and glad to have you here.
So David, I'd like to start with you as the senior member of our panel. Can you talk about how technology has forced media to evolve over the years, and really where the media is now, where the news media is now, and what we're facing?
Well, that's a big question. You know, it's the digital revolution happened, and it swept journalism along with it, and publishing. I think just things like digital film and word processing and all the tools that we have, and the immediacy of news and the importance of getting things right now, right in real time, and the ability to do that, plus the combined ability to share things with the community and empowering the communities that we serve so that they can join in the conversation, they can lead the conversation, they can take over the conversation, and then the consolidation of media and the vast changes in the economics of it all is just an immense change that's taken place.
Todd, you used to work at Seattle PI, and you've made the transition online. Where are people going for their news media? Where are they getting news now?
Well, it's no secret to anybody in the audience that clearly social media have become a front door for a lot of what each of us does, and that to me has been probably the biggest change that I've seen, that we've all seen over the past 2 decades. Sometimes I sit there and I long for the days when I could sit down for a day and work on a story for the next day's paper, and things have changed to the point that you're essentially chunking up your news coverage into these smaller bite-sized packages, and in some ways the news in that way has come to mirror some of the changes in social media, and that's really kind of what we're grappling with and trying to leverage day to day.
Mm-hmm. So who's the competition? This is just open to anyone.
Well, yeah. It really is.
Anyone is the competition.
I mean, the primary change over the last 20 years has been the ability to publish yourself, and I have the same reach as an individual, as just a person with a smartphone or something. I have more reach than an international business did that had 50 newspapers around the world. I can reach more people by tapping a few things out of my phone, and sometimes it'll be very important that I do. And so everybody really is involved, but that brings up a lot of difficulties as well as a lot of opportunities. So we're still in the throes of that. It's going to go on for a long time still, too.
Somebody want to talk about the difficulties?
Well, I just want to add on the competition front. It's funny because flipping it around in a positive way, that the competition is really whoever we want it to be. There was a time when, frankly, I would wake up in the morning and I would sort of be nervous at my computer because I know that Brier probably scooped me that morning. And, here was the guy. Brier and I competed a lot on the Microsoft beat back in the day. And now we're in a position where, running our business as GeekWire, we can essentially say, okay, who do we want to compete against? We're defining it ourselves. And that's a way that journalists were not able to do it, 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a young boy, I worked in a newspaper office, and every time at noon, right around noon, the publisher would shut himself in his office and turn on the radio and listen to the local radio broadcast of the news and write things down and make sure that everything that was on the radio news, we had that covered in the newspaper as well. And so that was very specific in those days. You knew exactly who you were competing against.
And now it's kind of everyone. It's, we've now discovered citizen journalism, we've discovered bloggers are out there, and anyone can be an authority on anything. And how do you, Brier, how do you deal with that as a member of a traditional journalism outlet?
Well, I think traditional journalism is still doing all right as far as being the authoritative voice. For instance, when there's you can't really tell day to day necessarily, especially with, kind of if you chunk up news into different tiers, sort of core important journalism, and then a lot of the chatter that comes across your news channel. And as far as the core reporting on big important things that happens, people still turn to traditional media to get that information. And so around here, for instance, when we have somebody running around shooting police or a big storm or something like that, even though there are multiple channels out there and many people have all kinds of options, they have TV, they're getting stuff on Facebook and Twitter and their friends and still they swarm to our newspaper and our website, and it's just crazy. We'll get 15 million people in a day coming to read about something like that. So I think that it varies depending on the importance of the news, how local it is, and you look for the most authoritative source on this news that's most important to you. And so local regional news folks tend to have an advantage when those news events are in their area, and people know that we'll do a good job with it. The trick for traditional media, though, is to continue to do a good job with that, even though our advertising is being hoovered off by everybody, and at the same time to stay engaging and interesting throughout the day when there's not a big news cycle, to continue to keep people's attention and to be seen as an important, lively news source the rest of the time as well.
I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but there's a storm going on the East Coast. It's called Sandy. and one thing that there were a couple of things I found really fascinating with it as I was checking in on the various channels that I go to for news, and I go to a lot more than usual. But the first thing I looked at was Facebook, and I saw a lot of photos out there. Some of them were real, some of them were not, some of them clearly were not, but there were some that were, that's a pretty cool photo, that could be real, and there was a lot of that out there without, there didn't seem to be an understanding out there that it wasn't a real photo. And then I know you guys, we were talking about it earlier, there was a guy who was updating Twitter reports in New York, and they were false. And CNN, there was one report he put out saying that the Wall Street trading floor had flooded. And CNN went with it, the Weather Channel went with it. And this seems to be the new problem that's out there with just people who are going out there with maybe true, maybe false, but it seems to be additional noise out there that media has to deal with. And how do we deal with that when people see that and just think it's true?
Well, they think it's true, and then somebody tells them it's not true. That's kind of how it works, but it's just the speed of the truth is a little slower than the speed of the untruth. So there's a kind of a lag time, and in that lag time, you get people seeing the picture of the clouds over the Statue of Liberty, and they think it's real. And sometimes that can be harmful, and sometimes it's not. Like, what if there was misinformation about where shelters were or something like that? That would be terrible. But it's something small and unimportant, like these things that are just trying to garner up likes on Facebook. But people are going to have to do some vetting on their own at some point. Like, I mean, if it's important and you need to have some kind of authority on things. This is why the traditional news media, where they take a little more time and get the fact checking and stuff like that, it still is extremely important because, there's no authority on Twitter. There's no, if you believe something that somebody says just because it's on there somewhere and it spreads and other people believe it, that's not an authority on anything. There's nothing behind that. It's just weird stuff on the internet.
I think CNN made a big mistake because the handle of this guy is @comfortablysmug. And it seems like they could have tracked it down, somebody else did later, but the pressure of the deadline and being out there first, oh my God, the floor at the Wall Street is flooded and we want to be the first with this news, is the problem that leads to these mistakes. But I like to say a lot of this stuff is self-correcting over time because we become much more sophisticated, and next time Comfortably Smug or somebody with a handle like that tweets something, CNN is probably going to investigate and try to find out who the source is before they go ahead and publish the information.
But it's Comfortably Smug this time, but what if next time it's somebody that's Reuters, News, Wires, or something like that with a Twitter handle or a news account or something somewhere that is, impersonating. Like there's an opportunity for much more mischief here. And this was a pretty innocent example, I think.
The New York Times and yellow cake uranium and missile tubes.
There's that, yeah.
Well, this sort of underscores the difference between information and journalism, right? I mean, in fact, the term citizen journalist is a bit of a misnomer because there are very few actual citizen journalists out there. There are lots of citizen information purveyors, but it's incumbent on people like CNN and us to make sure that we're actually practicing journalism. Information is obviously one component of that, but there's much more to it, including fact-checking.
Yeah. It seems, though, I'm seeing it more and more often where it's easy to fall in that trap, or you see that maybe the Weather Channel picked up Citizen Smug, and then it just becomes a snowball effect. One thing that we saw when the Gabby Giffords shooting happened in Tucson, Arizona, there were several media outlets that reported that she had died. And we were one of the ones that held out and didn't report it. But as more media outlets were saying, well, hey, NPR says it, that's credible. And it became just this kind of snowball effect where the noise got louder and louder, and the pressure on us, we were getting calls from our newspapers and our broadcasters saying, when are you guys going to say this? And can you just say it and say that NPR reported it? Well, it turned out to be wrong, obviously, but it becomes this loud echo chamber. And I'm wondering how you all kind of deal with that, and where is media turning to really combat that?
I guess I look at that as just something you have to live with to get all of the benefits of things like Twitter. And frankly, my worldview is just a little bit different than that. I get so much benefit from Twitter. I mean, it is a source of so many tips that I then go and confirm independently. I mean, I would know nothing, I would know nothing about what happens inside Microsoft's annual employee meeting that they're, allegedly shutting off, if not for all of those awesome employees who can't help but tweet that they got free Surfaces. So to me, I guess I look at that as just a minor downside, and frankly, an opportunity for us as journalists to distinguish ourselves from the public.
And can't Microsoft do something about that?
They try and they can. It's great. It's awesome.
Awesome. I think on the citizen journalism versus citizen documentation, like sometimes the information is the story, and that's really what matters. Like we were talking about Virginia Tech, and like sometimes you can't wait 5 minutes to fact check or whatever, and sometimes it matters that that information gets out within 30 seconds or 45 seconds or something like that. Every second counts when there's somebody stalking around with a gun, and that's what citizen documentation is about. And then later on, the journalism is in producing a story and context and things like that. But it's part of the news now is the citizen documentation. It's just that information is out there and it has to be collected and regarded somehow. And so it has to be considered as a serious part of the actual news cycle.
Yeah, the Arab Spring would not have unfolded the way it did, and we would not have known all that we knew about it without Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and those things.
I think part of it is the challenge is incorporating that as a news consumer and deciding how you're going to allocate your attention spans and what you're going to give priority to. In the news side, it's a kind of a design question. How are we going to design our news site so that we incorporate sources like that versus our own stuff? And it's, the traditional, the way we used to design our site in the old days, it's a little bit harder. We have to be more sophisticated now and say, here's this feed from say the social channel, or this feed from our channel, or this feed from wire service. And news consumers generally can figure it out. You have bylines and things like that, and attribution in there. But so, for instance, we had the police shootings here a little while ago, and Seattle Times was covering that. A great source of information as people were terrified in the city, wondering where these nuts were, and hearing gunshots. They were coming out on Twitter and things like that. Well, we incorporated a Twitter feed onto our page, and so we brought in that citizen journalism, but it was also alongside the stuff that we were kind of refining and producing with our traditional journalism skills. We even did the ill-fated Google Wave at the time, so that was a situation where we were experimenting with these different channels and trying to blend them with what we do traditionally. And I think that's what everybody's doing in their lives now, is they're trying to mix and match and come up with this menu of kind of the entree and the appetizer and the dessert and the cocktails in their news.
Amuse-bouche.
I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, Brier. Can you talk about some of the things that newspapers are doing? I mean, one thing that we're seeing is as information is free, some outlets are closing and putting up paywalls, and how is that affecting journalism? How do you think that's going to affect how people interact with news out there?
Well, they're going to have to pay for it. I'm sorry. If you want the essential reporting, not just the repetition of the headlines, but you want to have people going out and verifying things, somebody has to pay their salary. And Google ads, the Google model, everything's free and you make it up on penny per view ads, isn't going to cut the mustard. It's not going to make it. So basically, for the last 5-10 years, newspapers have been chasing that vision, being told to share free, make friends, be interactive. You'll make it up on traffic and ads. It's been a failure, and news organizations are bankrupt. They're laid off. Our news room is smaller than half the size of what it was 10 years ago. Internet ads have not supported our organization. So if you want to have that kind of core journalism reporting the facts locally and nationally, people have to pay for it. And actually it's working for the New York Times. So they're kind of the bellwether, and you're going to see probably, I'm guessing in the next year or two, every major newspaper is going to have some form of a paywall. People like to say, oh, well, they paid for music too. Well, they kind of have. That shift has happened. People have become accustomed to services that have good business models around them, around music. And music, it's not as profitable like it used to be, but the music industry is stabilized. And it's going to happen to news over the next year or two.
Even you guys?
I'm not going to say what the business plans are, but frankly, I'm sick of being wrung dry, as an employee, and I'm kind of furious that they haven't put a paywall up. And I think people are just going to have to decide if they want to pay for quality news. Do they want to have Tom Douglas news, or do they want to have McDonald's news? The McDonald's news will still be free, but you'll still have to pay for the Tom Douglas news.
I would actually, let me disagree with you. The mentality that you're expressing right now is actually what's wrong with traditional journalism. And that is, you're blaming your customer for doing what's natural rather than reacting and adjusting your business to meet their needs.
I'm blaming my boss.
Okay. No, but you're saying that the news consumer is doing something that they shouldn't be doing. They're, getting it for free, and they're going to have to learn to pay. And I think you should learn, the Times and other traditional media organizations should learn to develop business models that accommodate the natural trends in the marketplace.
Well, I disagree. I'm not blaming the consumers. Please come to the Seattle Times. It's free. Take all you want. Please read my stuff as much as you want. That's fabulous. I love the interaction. I love everything that we do right now is wonderful. We love the big traffic. We love the big numbers. We want our stories to be read as far and wide as possible. But at some point, we're offering a service. We're offering an executive digest of the news of the region and the world that we bring and put on your doorstep, and people pay us. A lot of people pay us for that. So why should we, offer that same product and give it away for free? I'm not saying people are wrong to take it for free. Of course, I would go where it's free too. But it's a business. Do you pay for HBO? Do you like HBO? Do you like Game of Thrones? It's not free. There's not a free version of it. If it is, you're stealing it. I'm not saying, so they've got a business model that works for them. They can produce premium content because people pay for it.
The problem with that is that there's like you're limiting your readership. All the people that read the Seattle newspaper that don't live in Seattle or who read it for very specific things aren't going to subscribe to it. I used to read the LA Times online just to follow the Lakers because they have stories every day about the Lakers. It was fun. Don't boo me. But anyway, when they started asking me to pay for the LA Times just to do that, then I look. What do? I don't pay them. I look for other sources, and I think that one of the great things about the internet is made local newspapers accessible to much larger audiences around the world, and by charging for it, you're limiting that audience. And you're already limiting your audience because fewer and fewer people will read the print edition or pay for it to have it delivered to their home. And there just aren't going to be any newspapers the way we think of newspapers. There's going to be a few big national newspapers like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, because it's worth it to pay for them. But it's not going to be worth it to pay for the Seattle newspaper, or the Oakland newspaper, or the San Francisco newspaper.
Well, it's not going to be worth it for you to pay for the LA Times, but hopefully you would think it would be worth it to know what's going on in your community and to have somebody monitoring your local institutions and providing that news. So I guess another thing is it's not all or nothing too. That's one thing. I think the reason the paywalls are starting to work and the New York Times has been successful, the Wall Street Journal's been successful, is it's not either or. People have gotten more sophisticated about it. They've got better DRM systems, so they're coming up with more refined models where you guys all know about this, where you can get 10 articles or 20 articles for free, or you might be able to see headlines, or there might be ways that you can still see what's going on if you use Google or some of the aggregators that have deals with them. So I think that what we're trying to find is a way that we're trying to find a balance between providing as many people as possible a glimpse of what's going on, yet if you want the full service, you're going to have to pay for it.
Well, I think that the business model thing is a good thing to point out, but it's not just, it's because the business model in most newspapers and most sites, this idea of display ads is hundreds of years old. Like basically the first time they had a newspaper, they put these ads on it and they now look the exact same after hundreds of years. And it's like, why don't we have something more sophisticated for monetizing millions of people coming to a website, visiting and seeing valuable content that they want to see, they want to pay for it somehow. And yeah, the writers and the reporters and everybody, they do have to be paid, but the reader doesn't want to pay, and maybe they shouldn't pay. Maybe they should pay in a different way. Maybe they should pay through stuff that they're afraid of right now, like their information is being sold, or there's referral links, or there's advertisements built into the article somehow. Like these things sound kind of weird now, but in a couple of years, when display ads are laughed at, like the way that crappy GeoCities banners and stuff are now, like it's going to be a much more natural way to monetize these millions of people coming in. It's like if you've got millions of people streaming past your shop and they're looking at your wares and stuff like that, there has to be a way to make money out of that. And it's just nobody's struck on it yet. And I think they will. It's just a matter of time. And it's not display ads.
Yeah. And I guess my broader point on the whole monetization paywall issue is that it seems really simplistic to say, okay, you must pay us for the news that we are producing. rather than saying, okay, how can we be at the core of the community and serve that community in some way that generates revenue, that creates a community, that still puts the news organization at the center as the resource in a viable way. It just seems like there's a much more comprehensive way of looking at it. For example, if I were running the Seattle Times, if I were David Boardman, the executive editor, I would absolutely be having events. It's ridiculous that the Seattle Times does not have events. You guys used to have an auditorium, for God's sake. And there are ways that news organizations need to adjust their thinking for the way that the world actually works, rather than just directly conveying the information and asking for money in return.
And Todd, that's something that GeekWire does. You want to talk a little bit about that?
We do, just because we happen to feel it's the right way to interact with the community. We had 9 events this past year, a wide mix of them, and it's just for us the right thing to do for the community, and it's also good for us as a business.
Are you turning a profit now?
We are. GeekWire is profitable. We just hired our first full-time reporter out of the UW. And so, I mean, I don't want to suggest that we have the magic formula. We are a very, very lean startup. There are 3 people on the editorial staff, 2 people on the business side, and we have to be scrappy. When I decided to go to LA to cover the Microsoft Surface launch, we delayed our furniture purchases for 2 months. I mean, it's those kinds of decisions, but they're the kinds of tough decisions that we have to make. And again, I don't want to suggest that we have the right formula. It's what's working for us.
You mentioned events, and something that I'm noticing more. Part of my job is to visit newsrooms around the Northwest, and something I'm noticing more is those walls that used to be between editorial and advertising are getting a little fuzzier, and they're starting to work together. And something that I noticed last week, BuzzFeed is now sort of allowing the Obama campaign to have a page under their branding that they update with their videos or whatever. I think Virgin is also working with them under the same idea. And is that what we're going to see? And how is that going to affect the news media in the future?
Well, I mean, you've got sponsored posts like that, which are kind of like a crude early version of this. But then what if every time you write an article about Samsung, the camera that you're writing up or something like that, there's a direct link to the Samsung page, or like where it gets bought or something like that, and that's a Samsung decides on the branding of that. That's basically a display ad, but like something a little more sophisticated, just something where Samsung or Obama or whoever actually has legitimate editorial placement, like is part of the content, because the advertising is merging with content. That's just a fact. There's weird conflicts of interest and stuff to worry about, but you're going to have to embrace it sooner or later. It's a matter of doing it ethically, and sometimes sponsored posts might be the answer. I don't know. That seems a little weird to me, but there are ways of doing it. You're going to have to get those walls are breaking down. There's no point in stopping it.
Yeah, and the underlying issue is, you mentioned display ads. Display ads still bring in a full-page display ad in the Seattle Times is about $80,000. On SeattleTimes.com, it's quite a bit cheaper, and so they're just not making a lot of money off of that.
It's because everybody hates ads, and you can block them right out. Millions and millions of people do. Used to be you could write an article, in print, and there would be an ad right next to it. You can't tear it out before you read the paper. You can't pay somebody to tear it out or do it for free. But on the internet, you can choose whether or not you want to see ads, and that's unbelievably destructive to an ad-based business model. Suddenly they're extinct. 10 years ago, totally that business model is totally extinct. And yet it's zombie walking along.
It gets harder and harder for people to figure out what, to select their menu of news. And all these things we're talking about, the sponsored things like that, it just make it harder and harder for people. They're already, frankly, I think, overwhelmed by the flow of news. And you asked about competition earlier on. For me, I think the competition for traditional media is really time as much as anything else. How much time are you going to spend in the morning or in the evening or throughout the day with traditional media when you have so many other things taking up your attention. You have, Facebook, Twitter, social, this, that, the other thing. So, part of the job of being an engaged citizen in your community is figuring out a way to know what's going on. And that's harder and harder and harder, frankly, I think, when you get more and more coming at you. And I think that maybe there's still an opportunity for the traditional media, though, to make it easier, to say, here's a simple option for you.
Well, let me bring up, you mentioned competing for time. There are some opportunities for media with new platforms, with mobile, with tablets, where people are now accessing media in different ways. And does somebody on the panel want to address how that's changed media and where you see that going? Is that going to be, are we all going to be getting our news on our phones?
Oh, yeah. Well, we already are. You're constantly accessible, like the sort of temporal, this time that you have in the day to read news and stuff. It's very important, that it's very valuable when you're in front of your computer or your laptop in the morning while you're having your coffee before you go to work. That's 20 minutes, and then when you get home, you've got about 30 minutes before the kids come home or whatever. But then all day long, you have your phone and you have little snippets of time. You're waiting in line for coffee. You're waiting for the meeting to start. You've got 3 minutes here and 10 minutes here. You add all that up, we're talking a huge amount of time when you're just waiting for news, interesting things to happen. It's an incredible opportunity, and it's also a good opportunity to send out the stories that are targeted, and there's another opportunity for not necessarily advertising, but for promoting the things that your site wants to promote, or there's a huge opportunity as far as time and exposure for all kinds of stories, because everybody's got something in their pocket that is just, they want it to blow up with something cool every second. They're just waiting for it. Like when your phone buzzes, you're like, what could it be? What could it be? Is it news? Is it a text? Oh boy.
Well, news consumption is one of the major things people do on tablets and phones and things like that. The news business has kind of been lurching around trying to figure out the best way to go about this. We've had just the pace of innovation is amazing on tablets. Of course, the last 3-4 years, we've had iPad, Kindle, all these other things have been racing along. And Seattle Times, for instance, we were right out there doing Kindle, and we've done apps and things like that. And it's been kind of interesting to see how that's evolved. The one challenge is that each new platform for a while was requiring us to build kind of a custom content management system for each one. And the key was making it as easy as possible to, publish our product on those different platforms, have the same look and feel, the same quality, without requiring too many more people to do it. You want as low touch as possible. You really want the press once, publish everywhere vision, and it really wasn't there. Amazon's initial thing with Kindle was a little tricky. It was kind of hard to get the design and stuff right. It took more effort than we wanted, and subscriptions weren't there enough to make the time worthwhile, really. Apple, of course, pulled everybody into the app model, and lots of creativity and effort went into building apps. Now, of course, people are kind of moving away from that more into HTML5 and into the browser, which is actually...
We all saw what happened to the Daily.
Yeah, exactly. Frankly, it was it took too much time, too much manual labor, basically, to publish to that tablet. It's kind of ironic, we've moved to tablets. It's so much leaner and easier and more efficient than publishing a newspaper. But still, you got to have a lot of people designing and writing different headlines and configuring the stories for those different templates. So HTML5, it's a lot more appealing because you can just use the browser and you can authenticate and validate, and you can charge. You can put a paywall up if you want. And we talked about new business models for traditional media. Well, now that sophisticated turnstile can be just in the browser. You build your website, use that browser. It makes your site accessible from all these different platforms, and then you can start having a better understanding of who your audience is. Then maybe we can have more refined ad models built around it.
Well, I think traditional media needs to learn, though, how to take advantage of by creating content that's appropriate for wherever you happen to be. And what brings this to mind is I was at a gas station, and have you ever heard of gas station radio? It's the most incredible thing. It's this traditional radio broadcast that's only broadcast at the gas station. So you're standing there at the pump, and you're washing your window, and you're pumping your gas. You're not looking at your iPhone, and this radio's blaring out, gas station radio, and it's got music, it's got news, it's got weather, and it tells you, come on inside, we've got lots of snacks and candy and blah, 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 and it's all about that gas station. And what you are doing, it kind of takes advantage of the internet because that's how they broadcast it to all the gas stations around, but it's a very traditional media. So you think, well, what kind of content do people want to read when they're standing in line at the Starbucks? What kind of content do they want to read while they're waiting before the movie starts? What kind, and if media, traditional companies can kind of figure out how to not just customize the delivery of the content, but the nature of the content and what that content actually is, given whatever situation you're in, then they'll have something.
Well, some restaurants around here are doing that. They take the sports section and they put it up above the men's urinals.
So. Right, that's cool. I love that.
That requires, I think, something that people aren't quite comfortable yet with, like this, basically broadcasting your location, what you're doing. A lot of people are really comfortable broadcasting it, and they do it all the time for no good reason. But at some point, it's going to be it used to be people were weird about having a phone on them at all the time. They're like, it's weird. It's like having a digital leash on me. But now nobody thinks twice about it. And so soon, the idea of constantly being monitored, your location, how much money you have in your wallet, what you're thinking of buying next, all this stuff is going to be not just public information, but information that you can trade sort of on a public market kind of. And I think that's like consumers have more to give than a dollar out of their pocket. Their whereabouts, everything like that is extremely valuable to many parties.
I think all of this speaks to the fact that the news organizations that are going to be successful in the next decade or two are the ones that actually involve designers and developers in the journalism process, in the decisions about not only how news is gathered, but about how it's conveyed. We go to these events, and I sit there, and a couple times I've got to sit behind the guys it's the guys actually, from The Verge and Engadget, and watching how they do their live blog. It's like, oh my God, these guys are using these tools from the 23rd century. It's like it comes out of their camera and it magically appears on their site 2 seconds later. And it's people who are really thinking through not only the distribution side, but the gathering side and applying technology throughout it that are really going to have an edge.
Who's sort of on the edge? Who's doing something cool now besides gas station radio?
I don't know, that sounds pretty cool. We've been talking as a group a lot about the Circa app. I don't know if you'd call it cutting edge, but it certainly is pushing the model of the bite-sized consumption. This is the app for the iPhone that actually just sort of follows stories in little chunks and lets you follow stories that they're tracking during the day. And I know you should talk about what you were explaining in terms of the attribution that they use, because I know this is an issue close to your heart from the AP.
Well, I think it's a really fascinating model, and I think the design is interesting. As Brier was saying, you were talking about having the ease of being able to publish your newspaper story in multiple places, and what Circa addresses is that maybe that newspaper story is not right for the phone user, who is somebody who just wants to thumb through a couple of nuggets to get that story. Maybe we all know the New York Times story on Hurricane Sandy is mammoth. And somebody who is on the phone is just not going to have time or really the patience to really look at that on a small screen. So it addresses that. The attribution issue, I think, from what I've been able to gauge, is that each little news nugget is attributed to a different source, and so there may be some interesting thoughts about curation and aggregation, and whether this is something that the field of journalism feels comfortable with. But there's also a question of trust. If I don't really know, there is a way to find out who is where that information came from, but you have to look. and it comes from multiple places, do I feel comfortable with those sources? Do I feel comfortable when I know that an outlet like CNN might go with something that is completely wrong and run with it for a while, and I will not know necessarily when I'm looking at this app where that comes from? That may be an issue that they'll need to address as they go through future designs, but it certainly does go back to branding of media and how much that means, how much really people can feel trust in the media that they choose.
And I think your other point, too, when we were talking, was that the attribution is very subtle in Circa. You actually have to seek it out, and that raises some issues there as well.
Yeah.
Well, they're treating news as if there's this big API out there where the news industry just feeds these things that they can then incorporate into their app, around which they will sell ads and monetize that feed.
Well, it kind of is. It's just really weird and mutant. There is a huge sort of API. It's just not official exactly.
Well, should you be consuming that at the site, and should you be rewarding the site that scrapes it, or should you be consuming it at the site that creates it?
Are you suggesting that news readers have a conscience about this kind of thing? I think that they just want the exact size of the news. They want it to fit their phone, and they want to get their news like that. And if the AP doesn't offer a version of the story that fits in a 1-minute soundbite, then they're going to, come hell or high water, find a version that does fit on the phone. And it's going to, the information is going to be reduced or expanded or added to or mixed up or whatever. It's going to happen. And how it goes about it, is right now, it's a little ugly how it happens, and it steps on a lot of people. It steps on the reporters who did the original reporting, and it skips over a lot of the people who paid for it, and it's ugly, but it's also the future, and at some point we're going to have to embrace it. But right now it is certainly ugly. I think that this really subtle attribution, like the not giving credit, the taking from multiple sources and stuff, it's what people want, and so it's where we're going. But at the moment, there's a lot of toes being stepped on.
Well, and there's the problem, are we going to really have in-depth, well-researched articles and news and reports on things that, the New York Times ran this big article about a week ago about the Chinese family that is the premier's family in China, and how they've amassed this incredible fortune of $2 billion, and it traced all the aunts and uncles and the guy's mom, and had this wonderful chart. It ran on for like 3 pages. They spent months and months researching this, and it must have cost a fortune to put this thing together. Well, who's going to do that in the future if everything's curated and everything is, you're going to run out of things to tap into eventually? I think it's already a problem that these big news organizations are getting smaller and have less resources to do this kind of really earth-shattering reporting.
We should open up to Q&A.
I do want to say that people will do that for free, though.
Yeah. And there's a whole discussion around crowdfunding there, too, that we could talk about. But
Yeah, I want to touch on the new models that are emerging. Specifically, Sarah Hill from KOMU just won 3 Emmys for digital interactive for, using G+ Hangouts on Air as a reporting mechanism, and Huffington Post is now using that. So going back to crowdsourcing news, how do you vet it, and what kind of models do you see emerging in this kind of new interactive world?
Anyone want to take that?
Well, if you think it's hard to vet now, just think in like 5 or 10 years when another 500 million people are using Twitter, Google+, AppNet, whatever, anything, like the problem's just going to get worse. So finding a solution to the problem, if it really is a problem, is very important. But I really have no idea. I work for TechCrunch. We didn't vet anything.
Maybe I'm just a Luddite. I'm disturbed by the trend in traditional media to just quote things from Twitter without bothering to track down who the actual person is and verify they actually said that. It's pretty sketchy. You wouldn't just go in the bathroom and take notes on the graffiti on the wall unless you knew the person that was writing it. So it's a little disconcerting, but it adds a freshness and a liveliness and a sense of being news du jour if you have, if you are showing that you're paying attention to these channels, which of course we are. But I don't know. It's a good question. I don't have an answer.
You could also ask, how do you prevent obscene phone calls calling into radio shows? I mean, this is a question that goes back a long time. Like, how do you prevent it? You can't really prevent it. You could just kind of deal with it. There's going to be trash and there's going to be good stuff online, and sometimes you're going to have a little bit of both.
I'm a senior right now at Western Washington University, majoring in journalism. So a lot of this stuff is talked about a bit in class, but ultimately, like with that newspaper up there, it is still a bi-weekly printed newspaper. And whenever there is a breaking news story, they will use the Twitter and then never touch it again. So my question is, with all of these advancements changing the game, what exactly would you tell college students to pay attention to? And what would you hope college students start doing to improve their own student newspapers?
Well, I talk to college students a lot. They'll come by the paper and things like that. And, people from my college were just at the paper a few weeks ago talking about career opportunities. I think the general advice is to be multifaceted and develop multiple skills, muscles, and abilities. You need to be able to write clearly, quickly, precisely, accurately. You need that, and no matter what the medium is. So you need to start with basics, but you also need to be able to communicate as quickly and broadly as possible using whatever tool you have at your disposal. So maybe today that's Twitter, maybe tomorrow it's something we haven't even heard about. So keep abreast of all those tools, use them, and experiment with them. The fantastic thing is they're free. Anybody can do it. You can set it up immediately, and you should go through that. I think if you're a student, go through that learning curve now. Do it at home. Do it under a fake name or something like that, where you can say embarrassing things and post the wrong stuff and do it all wrong. And do it now and get comfortable with those new tools. They're not very hard. They're really easy. Anybody can do it. So work on the basics. Try all the new stuff. Dabble, experiment, and be comfortable in this kind of a new realm.
Can I add one thing? I think you should build your own brand. You should have, be building your following on Twitter and Facebook and experimenting with Pinterest and all of these sites, and realize that journalism today, that the people that are really successful journalists, they have their own brand. It's no longer just, I'm a reporter at the New York Times. I'm John Markoff at the New York Times. I have 1,675,000 followers on Twitter, and that's part of my audience as well as the people who read the newspaper.
Yeah, but just to echo a little bit what Brier said, I would focus first on being the best possible reporter that you can. There's a lot of focus, I know, on making sure that you're active on social media and you're building your brand, but I would suggest that comes later. First, you really have to, as Brier said, really nail the basics, the fundamentals, because good reporting will trump bad distribution anytime. And over time, if you can prove that you're a good reporter, all those other things will just come as a matter of course.
And something that helps that didn't exist when I was a journalism student is use multiple things. So learn how to take photos and how to do video. It's something we look for when we hire.
And public records, oh my God, there is so much out there and no one is looking for it. Search court records, search property records.
Huge.
Really learn how to dig into your beat and use the technology to find the stories, and don't worry about it for now in terms of distribution.
I think one or two questions. Two more questions. Go ahead.
Hi. I have a traditional background in journalism, a BS in journalism and a master's in media studies, and I was at the Seattle Times in 1994 as an online community reporter on a bulletin board system called the Seattle Times Extra. We had dial-up connections we shared among three of us, two dial-up connections among three reporters. I was also on a kind of an underground team that built the first prototype for the Seattle Times. And my experience, and I love the Seattle Times, and with all due respect, we drug that paper kicking and screaming into the modern age. And I've seen that through studying, through my master's degree. I've interviewed tons of papers on how they've used digital. And that has been the history, I think, or the common experience. my take on it is I think it's the culture, and I think the culture's broken, right? So even in journalism school, you are ingrained in this culture, which in some ways is good, right? Because it tells you, I mean, they beat the crap out of you so that you do a good job and you check all your facts and all that. That said, it feels like an antiquated culture, and so I'd love to hear from you, you know, what can we do to change that? Or does it not need to be changed? Maybe it doesn't.
I think the culture has already changed, frankly. You know, we're digital first now. We're an interactive news website, frankly.
But beyond channel, that kind of authoritarian, top-down, does that make sense? Or maybe you guys haven't experienced that. That was my experience in journalism.
I think it's changing.
Yeah.
It's slow. And I think some of the things that we've outlined here, it's very hard for a newspaper to turn away from what has traditionally been.
Any institution, really, because considering newspapers have been doing more or less the same thing for 150, 200 years, you know, it's no surprise to me that it would take more than 10 or 15 years for them to turn around. And so it's frustrating when you're in the transitional period and you're like, well, why don't we have this feed, and why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we figuring out this attribution style for this? And they're like, look, we'll get there in 5 or 10 years. You're going to be gone in 10 years, but...
If you're getting $10 from David and I'm getting a dime from you, am I really going to be your friend? I'm going to hang out with David. Even though next year he's going to give me $9, you're still going to give me a dime or maybe 12 cents. So that's kind of what's going on in the industry right now. And I think it's changing. A lot of them are aware of this issue, and they're talking about this issue, and it's a struggle, and I think that, you know, they're no longer kicking and screaming. They know it has to happen. It's just making it happen in the easiest way and most seamless way possible.
I think organizationally it's changed quite a bit too. It's not, I mean, it's still, there's an editor and there are reporters. That structure is still there, of course, but the new publishing tools have put reporters closer to the readers. It's a more direct process to publish. Now, that's a good thing because you can be faster, and you know, you're relying more on the judgment of the people in the field to publish things. But the downside is, you know, those old steps to go through to publish were a good thing in some ways because it improves quality and you get more eyes and you get more perspective on what you're writing. And so you know, you can see the difference in the quality of what goes out the door. And you know, on the print product, still, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10, 12 people will edit a story before it lands on your doorstep, and that's good. You know, you get high quality stuff. You talk about that New York Times story. I'll bet 100 people edited that story that you're talking about, and it was fantastic.
We need to take one more question. I'm sorry.
I'll stop talking. Sorry.
Thank you.
As you guys are talking about the way that things have changed, and we're talking about citizen journalists, I work in disaster response, and what we've run into is trying to prioritize who gets. I'm an officer in the Coast Guard, and I work in public affairs. And so one of the things we've run into as a problem, and I know friends in the civilian agencies have run into, is when we're trying to prioritize who gets into an event or who gets onto that helicopter, looking at, you know, the traditional media, or looking at someone who does a blog that actually might get more reader hits, you know, and trying not to, you know, we get into the battle of, but I'm a real journalist and they're a blogger. How do you guys, I heard a noise back there. And for us, we have to reach the biggest audience possible. So what do you guys think about how are agencies or companies supposed to prioritize between the traditional journalist and this person who gets 100,000 hits a day on their website?
I personally, I would just say if the content is really cool, it's going to reach everybody on the planet, because whether it's the smallest blog you've ever heard of or not, like I've helped publicize great stuff that was started so small and like became this rolling snowball, and I got onto it somehow, and it ended up reaching millions of people just because it's really good stuff. And it, like whether you start as a snowball this big or a snowball that big, as far as I'm concerned, it really, like, I wouldn't worry about it. I would worry about getting the content out there, just period, and then, you know, letting it do its thing.
They're all important, really. It's all important. It's all part of a big ecosystem.
I disagree with those things. I think that the signal to noise is so high on the online sources that, you know, sure, you might find a blogger who can say, well, yeah, I get 100,000 views. what's the chance? What is the penetration of readership in the market that you're trying to reach? And actually, news and advertising businesses put a lot of effort into measuring and reporting these kind of things. So, you know, the official reporting thing says the Seattle Times gets 63 million page views, you know, so boom. I think the choices actually are easier for organizations like yours because there are fewer outlets. You know, there are fewer outlets that have big, broad reach and deep penetration in every market. It's a sad thing. You know, it used to be you had two to five traditional news organizations in Seattle that would probably be vying for a spot on that helicopter, and now really there's one newspaper and a couple of TV stations. So that really have that reach. I mean, I'm all for a variety of voices and perspectives, and more news is fantastic. But if you want a big boom hit, you know, there are only a few choices now.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel.